June job data shows promising future. In US, Labour Party win in UK election. Good morning. Welcome to Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Budnam. I am thankful to all international news resources and my team. I am also thankful to all American, European, Canadian, Australian, Asian, African channels and AP, AFP and Reuters news agencies. Now watch the channels. Rather, headlines. Owing troubles in Department of Justice. In ABC interview, Joe Biden said he will not quit. Hurricane Beryl is losing his strength. Kansas and abortion rights. Trump lawyers request for pause. Hungarian leader in Moscow. Ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas are turned on. Israeli attack in West Bank killed 7 Palestinians, according to Palestinian sources. Runoff presidential elections in Iran. 20 people died across America on 4th July celebration. On Wall Street, Nasdaq, Dow Jones Industrial and S&P 500 all increased. Abuse settlement in Canada. Ontario government-run liquor stores. First Nation art in Canada.
On this Friday night, Britain's rapid power shift.
The work of change begins immediately.
Keir Starmer officially takes the reins as the UK's 58th Prime Minister.
We will rebuild Britain.
What this could mean for trade talks with Canada. A settlement for hundreds sexually abused by Newfoundland and Labrador's Catholic clerics. How the church doesn't have the cash. Crushed spirits. The strike that's closed Ontario's government-run liquor stores. What workers want. And the art of honoring the Calgary Stampede and a First Nation.
I have a lot of memories.
A young illustrator's personal and award-winning tribute.
Global National, reporting tonight. Itu Kaca.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Britain has a new prime minister thanks to a general election that has dramatically reshaped the nation's electoral map, with nearly half the seats in parliament changing hands. After 14 years in government, the incumbent Conservative Party, led by Rishi Sunak, saw a near wipeout last night. Almost 2/3 of their seats are gone. Most were snatched up by Keir Starmer's centre-left Labour Party. The new prime minister taking on a commanding mandate with more than 400 seats in parliament. And it didn't take long for him to get to work. With the British vote now over, America's election campaigning is only heating up. U.S. President Joe Biden hit the campaign trail today in the face of increased scrutiny around his well-being. His message was loud and clear. I'm running and gonna win again. But in an interview with ABC News tonight, the 81-year-old was not so clear about last week's disastrous debate performance.
Did you ever watch the debate afterwards?
I don't think I did, no.
Was this a bad episode or the sign of a more serious condition?
It was a bad episode. No indication of any serious condition. I was exhausted.
Calls for Biden to drop out are not letting up. As Jackson Prosco reports, today's rally in the battleground state of Wisconsin marks the start of a weekend that could make or break Biden's future.
Can you still beat Trump?
The questions simply will not go away. Democrats face a crisis that could define November's election. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
In Newfoundland and Labrador, nearly 300 victims who suffered abuse by Catholic clergy finally know how much the Archdiocese will have to compensate them. A bankruptcy proceeding has determined the church must pay out more than $100 million for sexual and physical abuse cases dating back decades. But as Heidi Petrachik explains, it's money the now bankrupt Archdiocese doesn't have.
The Mount Cashel Orphanage for Boys in St. John's was demolished in 1992, and the fight to compensate those abused there was just beginning.
It triggers for them some of the worst experience of their lives.
Now, survivors know just how much they'll receive. An insolvency process has determined the bankrupt Roman Catholic Episcopal Corporation of St. John's should pay out $104 million for 292 claims. Some of the compensation payments could start this fall. Heidi Petrachik, Global News, Halifax.
Canada's economy lost some 1,400 jobs last month, while the unemployment rate climbed to its highest level in more than 2 years. Statistics Canada says unemployment hit 6.4% in June, up just slightly from 6.2% in May. Nationally, fewer people were working in transportation, warehousing, and public administration in June, while more people took up jobs in accommodation and food services. It remains unclear what this could mean for any possible interest rate cuts. The Bank of Canada's next rate announcement is set for July 24th. It is going to be a lot harder to buy alcohol in Ontario over the next couple of weeks. Thousands of workers with the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, or LCBO, went on strike today. The issue at the centre of the job action? Premier Doug Ford's ambitious plans to make alcohol more accessible throughout Ontario. A goal striking employees say could put their jobs under threat. Mackenzie Gray explains.
It's just a little bit cheaper anyways. Mackenzie Gray, Global News, Ottawa.
Reunited at long last. Coming up, how friends helped the Quebec man's family escape Gaza and come to Canada.
जैसा कि आप जानते हैं कि मेरी बहुत सारी सर्जरीज हुई, मेरे घुटनों से फ्लूइड निकाला जाता था और पेन।
Ceasefire talks over the war in Gaza appear to be back on after weeks of stalled negotiations. A delegation sent by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has just returned from gatherings with mediators in Qatar. Netanyahu's office says there are still gaps between the sides, but they will return to continue talks next week as public pressure to rescue the remaining Israeli hostages intensifies.
There is a deal here on the table. We ask you, all of you, all the people that are involved in it, please make it happen. Please bring our children back home.
There are also reports of a key revision by Hamas. According to Reuters news agency, a Palestinian official says Hamas is no longer demanding Israel commit to a permanent ceasefire as a precondition to any agreement. Hamas will reportedly instead negotiate for that during the first phase of the proposed deal outlined by the U.S., which will see fighting stopped for several weeks. The Canadian government has created a special program to help bring Palestinians affected by the crisis in Gaza to Canada. But as we've reported on Global National, those trying to bring stranded loved ones to Canada say the federal program is far too cumbersome, bureaucratic, and slow. Franca Minyaka reports on one Quebec City couple who took it upon themselves to reunite a Palestinian professor working here in Canada with his family.
Zachariah Hellis has waited 10 miles to the city home. Franca Minyaka, Global News, Quebec City.
Heat hovers over Western Canada ahead, how high temperatures could soar. The second round of presidential elections got underway in Iran today. Voter turnout was at an historic low in the first round. It's unclear if things will improve for the runoff. Iranians are choosing between a heart surgeon who presents himself as a reformer but whose powers will be constrained by Iran's supreme leader, and a hardline nuclear negotiator vowing to uphold Iran's strict religious and moral codes. The resort city of Cancun looked a lot different than paradise today as Hurricane Beryl barreled into the popular sun destination. Heavy winds and rain lashing the city and the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula as Beryl made landfall there as a Category 2 storm. It did some damage, but it was a far cry from the situation in other parts of the Caribbean that were in the storm's path. Beryl is now heading over the Gulf of Mexico toward Texas, where it's expected to make landfall on Monday. After a wet June, many Canadians on the West Coast are happy that summer is finally here, but forecasters are warning of the dangers, with temperatures potentially breaking the 40-degree barrier in some parts of BC by Monday. It's all because of an upper-level ridge of high pressure that has parked itself over much of western North America. The heat will be of particular concern in Northern California, where firefighters are trying to contain a major fire about 100 kilometers north of Sacramento. In neighboring Nevada, Las Vegas is set to push close to 50 degrees on Monday, possibly breaking yet another all-time high. Friendship forged. Next, how this year's Calgary Stampede poster brought an artist and a Stony Nakota teepee holder together.
For Calgary Stampede Parade Marshal Owen Croshoe.
A man who's been part of the Stampede in some way for more than 30 years, this year honored as Parade Marshal. Owen Croshoe is an actor from the Piikani Nation and blood tribe of the Blackfoot Confederacy. He'll also be emceeing this year's Calgary Stampede Powwow, a competition that highlights the diversity of First Nations dancing, singing, and drumming. It might not be the first thing you think about when you think of the Calgary Stampede, but art is as much a part of the show as 10-gallon hats and bucking broncos. This year, the winner of the 2024 Calgary Stampede Youth Poster Competition is Lloyd Templeton. He grew up watching the parade on the sidelines, but as Dallas Flexhog explains, this year he's part of the show.
At 23 years old, Lloyd Templeton is just getting into his career as an artist. Carefully illustrating with ink is his comfort zone, but he knew he wanted to push himself, trying for a third time to become part of the over 100-year history of Stampede posters, entering the competition for the 2024 edition by channeling his own memories of watching the parade downtown.
As a kid, that was my favorite part of Stampede. I have a lot of memories of horses in city streets. It's quite striking. So as a kid, I was just like enamored with that.
Flipping through hundreds of photos of past Stampede parades, he came across this picture of Stony Nakota teepee holder Dwayne Mark.
First of all, what he was wearing, his regalia, was just so visually striking and impressive, but
Good evening, I'm Amna Nawaz. Jeff Bennett is away. On the NewsHour tonight, the June jobs report exceeds expectations, while slightly higher unemployment signals a cooling economy. Labour Party leader Keir Starmer accepts King Charles' invitation to form a new government after a landslide victory in the United Kingdom's general election. And Boeing faces a deadline to accept a Department of Justice plea deal connected to the deadly crashes of two 737 MAX airplanes.
We will go to the ends of the earth to make sure that this isn't just something that goes away quietly.
Met by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. Today, President Joe Biden is digging in. In more than one appearance today, he underscored that he has no plans to leave the campaign, despite calls from some Democrats and supporters. We'll have more on that story later in the program. Meanwhile, the U.S. economy added more jobs than expected last month, marking the 42nd consecutive month of job growth. 206,000 new jobs were added in June. Government hiring accounted for more than a third of those, followed by healthcare, social assistance, and construction. Unemployment also inched up to 4.1%, making it the first time it's risen above 4% in more than 2 years, and there were other signs of a cooling labor market. Job gains in April and May were revised downward by more than 100,000 jobs. For a deeper look at what this means for the economy, I'm joined by Robin Farzad, host of Public Radio's Full Disclosure. Robin, always good to see you. So what do these numbers say to you? Is it a sign that the economy... In the day's other headlines, Hurricane Beryl has been downgraded to a tropical storm as it cuts across Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. Beryl made landfall in Mexico this morning as a Category 2 hurricane with winds around 100 miles an hour. It's left at least 11 people dead across the Caribbean, and it's expected to regain hurricane strength this weekend as it crosses the Gulf of Mexico and heads towards Texas. Officials there are urging coastal communities to prepare and have issued preemptive disaster declarations for 39 counties. The Kansas Supreme Court reaffirmed the state's abortion protections today, rejecting two anti-abortion laws. One would have banned a common second trimester procedure. The other would regulate abortion providers more strictly than other healthcare professionals. Justice Eric Rosen wrote the state constitution, quote, protects a fundamental right to personal autonomy, which includes a pregnant person's right to terminate a pregnancy. Donald Trump's lawyers asked a U.S. judge today to pause the classified documents case against him in Florida, citing the Supreme Court's ruling this week granting presidents broad immunity for official acts. In their filing, they argue that a pause would, quote, minimize the adverse consequences to the institution of the presidency arising from this unconstitutional investigation and prosecution. The request comes days after the judge in his New York hush money trial agreed to delay sentencing as he weighs the potential impact of the court's decision. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban says Russia and Ukraine are still, quote, far from each other in ending their war. That came during his unannounced visit to Moscow today, where he became the first European leader to meet with President Vladimir Putin since 2022. Orban was in Kyiv just 3 days ago, urging Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to accept a ceasefire. European leaders panned the Moscow trip as a form of appeasement rather than diplomacy. Orban argued he is in a unique position.
There are fewer and fewer, and now remain hardly any, who are able to speak with both warring parties. Hungary is one of very few.
After their meeting, Putin repeated his conditions that Ukraine withdraw forces from 4 regions that Russia claims to have annexed in 2022. Ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas look to be active again for the first time in weeks. Israel says that a top official held initial meetings with mediators in Doha today, but noted, quote, gaps between the parties. That follows Hamas submitting amendments to a 3-phase proposal backed by Israel, the U.S., and other nations. Talks are set to resume next week. In the meantime, Palestinian authorities say that an Israeli raid and airstrike in the occupied West Bank city of Jenin killed 7 people. A militant group claimed 4 of its members were among the dead. Iranians voted in a runoff presidential election today after a first round last week failed to produce a clear winner amid record low turnout. It's to replace the country's late president Ebrahim Raisi, who died in a helicopter crash in May. And it comes after years of social unrest and bruising economic sanctions. Iranians are choosing between hardliner Saeed Jalili and reformist lawmaker Masoud Pezeshkian. Some who voted today are hoping for change. Others say there's no point, since Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is the ultimate decision maker.
I want to save the country from the isolation we are stuck in, and from lies and the violence against women.
I will not vote because whoever comes to power cannot do anything since there's someone else above them.
A government spokesperson said turnout today was higher than in the last round, but videos posted online claim to show some polling stations were empty. Final results are expected on Saturday. At least 20 people have died and dozens more injured across the U.S. to start the extended July 4th holiday weekend. In Chicago alone, local media say 11 people were killed and 55 injured in the shootings as of this morning. In Huntington Beach, California, 2 people were killed and 3 were injured just a few hours after a fireworks display ended. And in New York, a truck plowed into a crowd of revelers in Manhattan, killing 3 people and injuring at least 8 others. Police say the driver was intoxicated. The July 4th holiday is historically one of the deadliest of the year. And on Wall Street, stocks ended higher after that monthly jobs data provided new hope for a potential interest rate cut. The Dow Jones Industrial Average inched up, gaining 67 points. The Nasdaq scored its fourth straight record close, adding more than 160 points, and the S&P 500 also climbed further into record territory. Still to come, on the News Hour, David Brooks and Kimberly Atkins Store weigh in on the week's political headlines. Wisconsin's Supreme Court revived the use of ballot drop boxes ahead of the 2024 election. And the International African American Museum helps visitors excavate their past through genealogy.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
After winning a huge majority in Britain's general election, new Labour Prime Minister Keir Starmer says he'll start working immediately on rebuilding the country. He promised what he called a big reset after 14, sometimes turbulent years of Conservative government. The defeated Conservatives are looking for a new leader after Rishi Sunak resigned as he left office. Special correspondent Malcolm Brabant reports from London.
Seconds after voting ended, exit polls confirmed that Sir Keir Starmer had...
Breaking news as we come on the air in the West. The ABC News exclusive interview with President Biden, the future of his campaign at stake. Tonight, George Stephanopoulos, one-on-one with the president. His first televised interview since his faltering debate performance against Donald Trump. The questions millions of Americans are asking: is he mentally fit to be president? And can he defeat Trump in November? What he's now saying about calls to drop out of the race. At a rally in Wisconsin earlier today, Biden insisting, "I am running and going to win again." George's full interview airing in primetime tonight. How will voters respond? And Rachel Scott with late reporting on the state of the race. Also on this Friday night, Tropical Storm Beryl now taking aim at the Texas coast. The storm slowing from a hurricane, now with winds up to 70 miles per hour. It could regain strength before making landfall, hitting with a life-threatening storm surge. Maria Villarreal in Texas. The wildfire emergency in the West. New fires erupting in California. Firefighters battling triple-digit temperatures. 158 million Americans on alert for dangerous heat. Las Vegas possibly hitting an all-time high. Overseas tonight, the seismic shift in British politics. The new Prime Minister riding a Labour Party wave into office. Conservative lawmakers swept from power in a historic landslide. James Longman in London. Here in New York, new images of a deadly crash on the 4th of July. 3 people killed by a suspected drunk driver. Video appearing to show a truck speeding through an intersection, moments before slamming into a crowd of people celebrating the holiday in a park. The chilling image of a woman attacked by a shark in Texas. Her husband bitten, trying to save her. The same shark apparently attacking 4 people in all. The new warning about sharks in the water. The July 4th misfire, fireworks launching into the crowd, multiple people hurt. And America Strong tonight, a new mother in desperate need, and the police officer going above and beyond.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World.
Tonight, President Biden blasting Democrats trying to push him out, but it's the drumbeat to step aside, getting louder. The president defiant today in battleground Wisconsin, declaring, "I'm staying in the race. I'll beat Donald Trump." But the new report that an influential Democratic senator is trying to get colleagues to ask him to leave the race. Plus, major donors now demanding the president drop out. Also breaking tonight, the threat from Hurricane Beryl slamming Mexico and taking aim at the Texas coast. We're tracking it live, and more than 140 million Americans are sweltering under heat alerts as a dangerous new wildfire scorches California. The record travel rush, millions hitting the road and the airport this weekend. When is the best time to go? Holiday tragedy, 3 killed, more injured when a suspected drunk driver plows through a crowded New York City park, and the alarming new details we've just learned about that suspect. The stunning power shift in Great Britain, the new Prime Minister meeting with the King after winning in a landslide. Plus, more on those shark attacks in Texas and Florida. You'll hear from a survivor from her hospital bed describing how she fought it off and how to stay safe in the water this summer. And the new warning about sunscreen misinformation. Doctors describing the danger now being spread by social media influencers.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Hey, good evening.
I know, I'm the real hero. It's Friday, so you know what that means. Let's welcome tonight's guest. If you want to see fireworks, just mention him to his ex-wife, actor, writer, and comedian Jamie Lissow. She just got engaged, and she wants you to know it's not Jamie Lissow. Republican strategist Aaron Perini. She's the toast of the town, Jonestown. New York Times bestselling author and Fox News contributor. And he uses a volcano as a fondue pot. New York Times bestselling author, comedian, and former NWA. All right, fair enough. Before we get to some news stories, let's do this.
Greg's Leftovers.
It's Leftovers, where I read the jokes we didn't use this week, and as always, it's my first time reading them. So if they suck, we'll dress up Joe Mackey as a visiting angel and send him to the White House. Yeah, it is funny. In an all-staff phone call made to alleviate concerns, President Biden was heard saying, "I'm not leaving." No one was sure if he meant the presidency or this mortal coil called Earth. Don't use that phrase enough. Online conspiracy theorists believe Joe Biden struggled in the debate because he was hit with a directed energy weapon. This is called Havana syndrome, although doctors said it's more likely he was Havana stroke. That was good. That was funny. Now, if Dems choose to replace Biden, it could come down to Gavin Newsom versus Kamala Harris. Interesting showdown. One candidate screwed most of California, and the other is Gavin Newsom. She put a lot of people in jail. Following the Supreme Court's immunity decision, some worry it would give a president power to assassinate their enemies, which is why the feds have put stairs, solid food, and words in protected custody. Because those are his enemies. Stairs, right? Words, solid food. See, now it's funny. Keith Olbermann called for CNN to be burned down over their debate moderator's performance. He also called for the execution of the local teens who keep ringing his doorbell and running away. An old shut-in. According to a Democrat insider, Joe Biden said he'll concede to a different candidate if he can't change public opinion over the next few weeks. We don't have that kind of time, said his doctor. According to the New York Times, Biden's debate prep didn't start until 11 a.m. and he took a nap every afternoon. Wow, that's how Jesse preps for the 5. In a new Vanity Fair article, there's a creepy photo appearing to show RFK Jr. preparing to take a bite out of a barbecued dog. He claims it's not a dog, but a goat. Who gives a shit? I've killed both, said one woman. Yesterday, everyone celebrated the 4th of July. Here in NYC, instead of chalk, police are outlining bodies with ballpark franks. Thank you. A Delta flight from Detroit to Amsterdam had to make an emergency landing after they fed passengers spoiled food. One concerned man asked, what happened to the rest of the food? Every time. Every time. Jamie Foxx has finally broken his silence on his mysterious hospitalization last year. Congratulations on his transition. Police in New Zealand are hunting for a 400-pound woman who assaulted a teenage boy with a metal pole while on the bus. Apparently, he threatened her with a small garden salad. And in San Diego, a sea lion charged dozens of beachgoers, terrifying them. So that's why Joy wasn't on The View. All right.
Breaking tonight with his re-election campaign on the line, Joe Biden sits down for a high-stakes interview.
Do you dispute that there have been more lapses, especially in the last several months?
Can I run the 110 flat? No. But I'm still in good shape.
What the president said, how it's being received, and the growing pressure on him to step aside. A summer strike shuts liquor stores in Ontario and leaves customers scrambling to stock up.
It's slim pickings. Obviously, there's been people in before me.
And a new report sheds light on what caused that massive Rogers outage.
All I see is a report that basically says, fine, nothing to see here, move along.
But some say it doesn't go nearly far enough.
From CBC News, this is The National with Ian Hanamansi.
After days of speculation and with pressure building to step aside, tonight a defiant U.S. President Joe Biden went prime time, refusing to back.
A historic win by Britain's Labour Party has shaken up the political landscape in the United Kingdom. And joining me now to talk more about what Canada's relationship will look like under a Labour government is Mel Capp, a former High Commissioner for Canada in the UK. Mel, good to speak with you.
Nice to be here.
First, maybe give us an idea of what Keir Starmer brings to the table. What could this mean for Canada?
Well, first of all, he's a former public servant. He was the director of public prosecutions in the Crown Prosecution Service. He was a defense lawyer before that. He's trained in the law, but he did get a degree from Oxford, but his first degree was actually from Leeds. And so he's very proud of the fact that his father was a tool and die maker and that he comes from simple background. He doesn't have any governing experience as such beyond the administrative in the Crown Prosecution Service, but I think he will bring a recognition of a need to ally with other like nations, and Canada and our current Prime Minister, who is well experienced internationally, will be an ally.
Justin Trudeau issued a statement congratulating the new PM today, saying the two will work to conclude the trade deal. I'm curious from your perspective, how big of a priority you think this will be for Starmer?
Not very much. He has a major job to do in repairing the relationship with the European Union. He needs to get a trade deal with Europe more than he needs a trade deal with Canada. It's 300 million people, 40 million people. I choose the EU. In fact, for Canada, we have the comprehensive economic and trade agreement with the European Union that Britain is not a part of anymore. And the 60 million people of Britain, we would like to have a deal with them, but it won't be a very high priority for us either. The only other thing is to note that beef, cars, and cheese are major awkwardnesses, if not difficulties, in the negotiation, and it'll take a long time before we get over those humps. In particular, because the House of Commons has strapped one of our arms behind our back. In C-282, it passed legislation that said our trade negotiators cannot negotiate on milk and milk products. And I think that is lunacy.
This election win also comes less than a week before NATO leaders gather in Washington for the annual summit. We know the previous UK government was putting pressure on Canada and other NATO allies to, even further increase defense spending. Do you see that pressure subsiding at all under the Labour Party?
No, I think Keir Starmer and his new foreign minister, David Lammy, and David Lammy has very close relations with Canada, and he goes back to the Gordon Brown administration when Labour formed government. And Lammy, as a foreign minister, foreign secretary, will want to have good relations with Canada, but will pressure us to up our ante in terms of our military spending as a member of NATO. The NATO meeting in July 9th, I believe, in Washington, will be a place for Keir Starmer to make friends with other countries.
I'll be bringing you the latest from Greece and Cyprus live here on news and other TV programs. So join me here on France 24.
Nathalie Zavarikas, one of the 200 France 24 correspondents around the world.
Thanks for joining us here on Night Watch. You're watching France 24, and these are the top headlines. US President Joe Biden speaks in a network TV interview seen by many as a cognitive test to silence his critics following the live Trump debate. Fresh from taking over the European Council's rotating presidency, the Hungarian leader Viktor Orban sparked outrage across the bloc, making an apparently friendly visit to Vladimir Putin in Moscow. And France are through to the Euro 2024 semi-finals after Portugal goalkeeper Diogo Costa is unable to save them this time in the penalty shootout. Les Bleus will face Spain, who knocked out hosts Germany in the earlier match. Welcome to France 24's Night Watch programme. I'm Alexander Alcott. US President Joe Biden has sat down for his first TV interview since the disastrous debate performance against Donald Trump, trying to quieten concerns about his age and mental abilities at 81 now. He admitted repeatedly that he'd had a bad night, but insisted that he's still fit to run for another 4 years, by which time he'd be 86 years old by the end of the second term. Washington correspondent Fraser Jackson joined us earlier.
It's an interview that Joe Biden hopes will allay fears of his age. And sit down with ABC's anchor George Stephanopoulos, airing at 8 p.m. Eastern Time here in the United States. And the first clip that we have of it, Joe Biden says that he had a bad episode that day, that coming off the back of Nancy Pelosi, the former Speaker of the House's comments that she needed to know whether it was a bad episode or more of a condition. Joe Biden said it was a bad p.m. Eastern, but we'll know more about how the president did.
The United Kingdom has a new Prime Minister. After 14 years of Conservative Party rule, the keys to Downing Street have now been passed to the Labour Party leader, Sir Keir Starmer. The election witnessed an historic and unprecedented swing compared to 2019. The Labour Party barely gained any more support, but it was the upstart Reform led by Nigel Farage that took away so many of the Conservative votes, splitting those and handing dozens of extra seats to the centre-left. Here's a look now at the challenges ahead for Sir Keir Starmer.
To rebuild our country.
Rebuilding the country will start with revitalizing a struggling economy. The last 2 decades have been defined by austerity, Brexit, and a disastrous tax-cutting gamble. Income stagnated, living standards deteriorated, business investment slowed.
The economy hasn't been growing very fast in recent years, so it's got to try to get growth up. They promised to get growth up, which is a very major commitment, very difficult thing to do.
From crumbling infrastructure and a chronic housing shortage, to rising homelessness and a national health service in a state of crisis, the list of problems is long. Starmer's made wealth creation his #1 priority, but the new government's capacity to fix these issues will be severely constrained by a debt burden bigger than the size of the economy, and Starmer's promise not to raise taxes.
The policies on offer from the Labour Party are not that different from those that the Conservative Party was offering or has been running. The truth is, isn't that much money, public money, to spend on new services, so it doesn't give any party taking power a lot of freedom.
On the international stage, Starmer's ruled out rejoining the EU, but said he'd work towards reducing trade barriers and ease border checks to help small companies. Among other challenges, tackling migration issues. Labour is set to scrap the Tory party's Rwanda policy, sending migrants arriving in boats to the East African country to process their asylum request.
If it was a bad night for the Tories, it was also devastating for the Scottish National Party, which lost a whopping 38 seats of the 48 they'd held north of the border previously. It means the party drops from being the third largest in the country, with a question in Parliament each week, to the fourth largest without that, and is expected to wipe out the push for independence for a generation.
It's dominated Scottish politics for a decade, but the SNP is licking its wounds after the UK general election on Thursday. Its leader, John Swinney, says the Scottish National Party has some soul-searching to do.
There is clearly more that is going to have to be done for us as a party to reflect on the election outcome, to reflect on the issues that it raises, and to listen to each other and to learn from each other about what is necessary to be done.
The SNP clinched a major victory in 2015, the first general election after the independence referendum. But since then, the faith in the independence message has gradually faded, and the party's failure to deliver a second referendum has disillusioned its core voters, amid its policy failures, divisions over gender reform, and the ongoing police investigation into party finances.
I mean, there's no getting around the fact that the SNP have had an awful result. One way of reading it is, for the moment, for voters, independence wasn't the key question. For the moment, for voters, they want to punish the SNP for their record. For the moment, voters want to focus on getting rid of the Conservatives in Westminster, and they figured that the way to do that is to vote Labour rather than SNP.
Losing so many Westminster seats means a drastic cut in state funding for the SNP, as well as fewer speaking slots and reduced presence in the Commons due to fewer MPs. It also means a lack of a mandate to negotiate on leaving the United Kingdom, with a new referendum on the horizon highly unlikely.
We do, of course, have elections here in France ongoing, but we're in the period of electoral silence ahead of the second round. You can join us on this Sunday with Gavin Lee and Nadia Massey, with a team of correspondents at various party headquarters and international capitals, and with politicians and analysts here in our Paris studios. That's on Sunday from 7:30 p.m. Paris time. Do tune in for that. Next, fresh from taking over the European Council's rotating presidency, the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has made a rare visit to Moscow for direct talks with President Vladimir Putin. Orbán has been criticised for being the only EU leader to maintain ties with his Russian counterpart, but he described the trip as a first step towards restoring dialogue that will eventually lead to peace and the end of the war in Ukraine.
A warm handshake, which is sure to get EU leaders talking. Just 5 days into holding the rotating presidency of the EU Council, Viktor Orbán touched down in Moscow for talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin, a visit of which he did not inform his EU partners. Orbán said the talks centered around peace proposals for Ukraine.
I saw that the views of the two sides remain far from each other. There are many steps needed for bringing the war to an end and creating peace. But in terms of restoring dialogue, the first important step has been taken today, and I will continue this work.
The EU was quick to condemn the visit, warning against appeasing Moscow and undermining the bloc's collective stance on the conflict.
Viktor Orbán's visit to Moscow falls exclusively in the bilateral relations between Hungary and Russia. The EU's position on Russian war against Ukraine exclude official contacts between the EU and President Putin. Prime Minister Orbán is thus not representing the EU.
Orbán's actions have also been condemned by Kyiv. This just days after he made a similar unannounced trip to Ukraine, where he urged President Volodymyr Zelensky to consider a ceasefire agreement with Russia.
As Viktor Orbán was engaging in those pleasantries with Putin, the Russian leader's military was continuing its relentless bombardments of Ukraine, and some of the latest multiple attacks killed at least 7 people this Friday alone, and wounded more than 24 others, that in the eastern region of Donetsk. Moscow has centered its firepower recently on the industrial area that it annexed and partially took control of more than 10 years ago in that initial 2014 invasion in country. Regional prosecutors allegations have been whipped up by right-wing political opponents. Just a few minutes into the closed-door preliminary hearing, the judge suspended proceedings, setting a new date for July the 19th. Our Madrid correspondent, Sarah Morris.
The judge was supposed to question Begoña Gomez, Pedro Sanchez's wife, on allegations that have been brought by an anti-graft body that is linked to the far right. It's called Clean Hands, and they essentially say that Begoña Gomez has used her position as the wife of the Prime Minister, that she fundraises for universities and for business consultancies, and that by in many cases putting her name to recommendations in letters she influenced over public contracts. Now, there's been a lot of these allegations in the Spanish press, including in one of the online newspapers, El Confidencial, and there have been a lot of reports. Now, it seems as if Clean Hands, this anti-graft movement, picked up some of those newspaper reports, complained to the court, and one judge in Madrid agreed to investigate. And basically, Juan Carlos Peinado, the investigative magistrate, was supposed to question Gomez today, but her defense lawyer successfully made the case that she had not been informed about a second set of allegations brought by another far-right organization after heard, and she wouldn't essentially be able to get a fair defense. So the case, the questioning will be postponed until July the 19th, when the Prime Minister's wife will be back in court.
Sport for elections in the counting underway in that vote following the
will be back in court. The case, the questioning will be postponed until July the 19th, when the Prime Minister's wife will be back in court.
Sport for elections in 2024, and here's another one. Vote counting underway in the snap vote in Iran following the presidential runoff vote. The first round that was called after the former leader was killed in a helicopter crash saw a record low turnout, despite the authorities extending the voting several times, and it seems to be now much the same turnout-wise. The Interior Ministry says now that the reformist candidate Masoud Pezeshkian is ahead of Saeed Jalili, former nuclear negotiator. This coming not from exit polls but from the votes actually counted so far. The full results are expected to be announced later this Saturday. Sport now, and the latest football action. France are through to the semi-final of Euro 2024. Particularly amazing as they failed to score a single goal in open play all tournament. They won a penalty shootout against Portugal.
Best match ever in Euro. Congrats to France, but I'm very sad in Portuguese. I don't know. It's football. It's like this.
The first half was very boring, if you ask me. Very few chances. The second half was way better, thanks to Ousmane Dembélé. After Mbappé was subbed out, it was a bit difficult for France, but they put everything into the penalties. It will definitely be more difficult against Spain.
There was so much tension. We didn't score a goal. I think we were not gonna make it, but we did it. We did it at the end. We won at the penalty shootout for the first time at the end. So that's a miracle. Nothing can stop us.
That's all for this edition. Stay tuned for more of news on Fast 24.
Hello and welcome on board. You're watching Eye on Africa, and I'm Clarisse Fortuné, and these are our top stories. Starting afresh. Hello and welcome on board. You're watching Eye on Africa, and I'm Clarisse Fortuné, and these are our top stories. Starting afresh and facing the youth, Kenyan President Ruto proposes new economic measures and goes on social media to apologize for police brutality during anti-tax protests. A decade since Ebola, Sierra Leone is now battling another outbreak, the Lassa fever. The mortality rate has skyrocketed in recent years. And then to Morocco, where the country's wine industry is thriving. Less well known but still crucial to the sector is the activity of pork harvesting. But first to Kenya. After weeks of nationwide protests against a proposed tax increase, President William Ruto has now come up with a new series of austerity measures to cut spending. It includes reducing the number of advisors in governments by 50%.
Major budget cuts and additional borrowing. That's the solution Kenya's President William Ruto proposed on Friday to fill the nearly $2.7 billion hole in the budget caused by the scrapping of planned tax hikes. The announcement follows over 2 weeks of deadly nationwide protests, which pushed him last Thursday to withdraw the finance bill containing the controversial measures. Ruto has been caught between the frustration of Kenyans reeling from the rising cost of living and lenders like the International Monetary Fund who want him to reduce debt. The austerity measures include the dissolution of 47 state corporations, a 50% reduction in the number of government advisors, and the suspension of non-essential travel by state and public officers. The president also announced a forensic audit of the country's debt, which sits at more than 70% of gross domestic product, and he said he will soon announce changes to the government.
Thousands of Yemeni demonstrators gathered in the capital Sana'a on Friday in support of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Yemen's Houthi rebels, who control most of the territory, have organized demonstrations nearly every Friday since the latest war in the decades-long Israeli-Palestinian conflict erupted last October. What our army, missiles and naval forces have already achieved was not enough for the beloved Yemeni people, and they are asking for more. Today, the Yemeni people speak out that they can never abandon Palestine. They are saying that the Palestinian people is not alone and that Yemeni people in all areas and provinces stand with Palestine with all their power. In addition to the Gaza Strip, fronts in the war include one in the West Bank, one on the border with Lebanon, and one in the Red Sea, opened by Yemen's Houthis. A fresh round of negotiations for a phased ceasefire is ongoing in Qatar. Mothers of Israeli hostages held by Hamas in the Gaza Strip marched in Tel Aviv to call for the return of their loved ones. Palestinian militants are still holding around 80 hostages. The office of the Israeli Prime Minister said Thursday Benjamin Netanyahu was sending negotiators to resume ceasefire talks. This came after Hamas sent its latest response to the US-backed proposal. Yael Alexander, the mother of a 19-year-old who was taken hostage while serving in the military, marched Friday.
I come today to scream as a mom that 9 months my kid is in Gaza, is in the tunnel of Hamas, and he needs to come back home. We need a deal, and we need it now.
US, Egyptian and Qatari officials are already present in Doha. The US proposed plan would see the release of all hostages in return for a lasting truce and the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza.
After her son and the family's sole breadwinner was arrested last year, Tambudzai Tembo went into meltdown. In Zimbabwe, where mental health services are scarce, her chances of getting professional help were next to zero. She contemplated suicide, but she was saved by a wooden bench and an empathetic grandmother. I'm so relieved that you've come. Please do this regularly. I'm still carrying a heavy load, but this visit will go a long way. She's speaking to Suridzai Dzukwa, one of the many older women who've received basic training in problem-solving therapy by the Friendship Bench Initiative.
Grandmothers are the custodians of local culture and wisdom. They are rooted in their communities. They don't leave, and in addition to that, they have an amazing ability to use what we call expressed empathy, the ability to make people feel respected and understood. That's why we focus on grandmothers.
After being trained, the older ladies wait on the bench, ready to listen to people in need of someone to talk to.
This is the first time an intervention or model of this nature has been used, particularly providing therapy on wooden park benches and using grandmothers. We are the first to pioneer this kind of approach, and we are now replicating the model in different parts of the world.
The concept has taken root in countries including the United States, Vietnam and Kenya. People are increasingly embracing this initiative, and the stigma around it is going away. As we move around the communities with our bright t-shirts, people are no longer ashamed or afraid to openly stop us on the streets and to ask us to talk. Mental health is no longer something to be ashamed of. Over 2,000 grandmothers are now part of the therapy initiative.
Tension increases, this area will be the most important in the world.
Propaganda and provocation. Russia is pushing the boundaries.
Showing the middle finger to Norwegian authorities. When it comes to the Russian regime, there is a lack of trust now.
Foreign correspondent returns July 18 on ABC and ABC iView.
Today, US President Joe Biden attempts to stave off concerns he's not fit to run his country. A sit-down interview. Also ahead, a woman's body found at a waste facility in Melbourne's north. The teenage boy killed after an L-plated driver crashed into a tree north of Newcastle. And reformist candidate Masoud Pezeshkian wins Iran's runoff presidential election by more than 2 million votes. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Ruby Cornish. A highly anticipated interview with US President Joe Biden has aired in America. Mr. Biden is trying to stave off concerns about his ability after a disastrous performance in the first presidential debate. North America Bureau Chief Jade McMillan has more from Washington.
Joe Biden was defiant. He insisted that he...
This is Asia Now.
Now it's 12 p.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong, 9:30 in New Delhi and 11 o'clock in Jakarta. I'm Alexia Silveraci. Headlines this hour. Scrambling to diffuse concerns over his shaky debate performance, US President Joe Biden tells ABC News in his first TV interview since the event that he was ill with a really bad cold but is in good shape to run for re-election.
It was a bad episode. No indication of any serious condition. I was exhausted. I didn't listen to my instincts in terms of preparing for the bad night.
China hopes for a win-win cooperation with the UK as new Prime Minister begins work. Keir Starmer will hold his first cabinet meeting today as he kickstarts his plan to rebuild Britain. And reformist candidate Masoud Pezeshkian wins Iran's presidential runoff vote, defeating hardline rival Saeed Jalili. The moderate lawmaker had campaigned on the promise of reaching out to the West and easing the enforcement of the country's mandatory headscarf law. US President Joe Biden has told ABC News in his first TV interview since last week's dismal debate performance that he was sick, suffering from jet lag and feeling terrible. He called his performance against rival Donald Trump a bad episode, suggesting that it was a one-time occurrence.
No indication of any serious condition. I was exhausted. I didn't listen to my instinct.
This is DW News live from Berlin. Part damage limitation exercise, part charm offensive. US President Joe Biden doubles down on his insistence that he is fit for another 4 years in office. That's after the 81-year-old's poor performance in last week's debate against rival Donald Trump. Also coming up, Britain's new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, meets the King and immediately convenes his new cabinet. With 11 women ministers, it's the most female cabinet in UK history. Also coming up, the Tale of Two Cities tells the story of a day in football. Berlin celebrates Germany's Euro 24 equaliser against Spain. But it was the Spain fans who celebrated last in Barcelona and right across the country as they made the Euro 24 semi-finals. I'm Anthony Howard, welcome to the program. We start in the United States, where President Joe Biden has returned to primetime television after a disaster.
The UK's new Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has promised to bring change. But what does this mean for the future of Britain?
Hungary's Viktor Orban was in Moscow for talks with Putin in a rare visit to Russia by a European leader since it invaded Ukraine more than 2 years ago.
On the morning of the Labour Party's landslide UK general election win, party leader and new Prime Minister
Thank you.
Tonight, a defiant Joe Biden hits the trail to try and save his political future.
I'm staying in the race. I'll beat Donald Trump.
Will it be enough to quiet the growing calls for him to drop out of the race?
We're going to save our democracy.
The CBS Evening News starts now. Good evening, I'm Adriana Diaz in for Nora O'Donnell. The message from President Biden could not have been more clear. He says he is completely ruling out leaving the race. Biden hit the trail in battleground Wisconsin, knowing the stakes. A growing number of Democratic lawmakers and donors want him to step aside over concerns about his fitness to serve. Just today, one of his top allies, Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey, asked him to carefully evaluate whether he's still the Democrats' best option. And CBS News has learned that Democratic Senator Mark Warner of Virginia is talking to colleagues about finding a way to ask Biden to get out, according to one senator contacted. CBS's Scott McFarland is in Madison, Wisconsin, where the president spoke this afternoon. Scott, frame it for us. Just how important is today and this weekend to the future of Biden's candidacy?
A pivotal 72 hours ahead. He has a network primetime TV interview tonight, a rally in the battleground state of Pennsylvania Sunday, and he told reporters he's talked to at least 20 members of Congress as he tries to save his campaign from internal party pressure.
Tonight, a president under pressure. Joe Biden attempts to change the conversation and restore some lost credibility. His first interview since the debate disaster.
It's a bad episode. Nobody's welcome behind.
And a pledge that he can still win.
I'm staying in the race.
The unemployment rate climbs, with young Canadians hit the hardest.
Very difficult right now in the job market to get a job.
Also, a fiery highway collision involving a driver too young to be on the road.
I never saw him coming. All I felt was a massive hit from behind.
Plus, saddling up in Calgary for the greatest outdoor show on Earth.
It's my first time at a Stampede Parade. I'm having a blast. Woo!
And the inspiration behind some remarkable pieces.
A really big goal of the work for me is to just bring joy and beauty.
How an autism diagnosis led to an artistic breakthrough.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.